Okay, so hello, good evening and welcome. My name is Philip Duval. I'm the chair of Equality North West, a local body affiliated to the National Equality Trust campaign for greater income equality. Tonight's talk is the third talk I've hosted about the banks and the banking crisis. The first two with the BBC filmmaker David Malone, which you can view on our YouTube channel, illustrate very clearly that despite all the propaganda, the spending cuts and service closures that we are all suffering now are a direct consequence of the bank bailouts in 2008. Now, it is one thing to suffer this great crisis for the sake of the greed and reckless gambling of a few. It is something else altogether to realise that so much of what the big banks do is out and out fraud. Now, that sounds like a very big statement and one that many people might have trouble believing, but after the PPI and interest rate swap scandals, the LIBOR rigging, the HSBC drug money laundering, and now the current allegations of energy market and gold market manipulation, it's becoming clearer to more and more people that our banks consider themselves to be above the law. But sadly, as I have discovered since being introduced to Rowan, this isn't a new phenomenon, and it's been going on for decades, if not centuries. And I'd like to see something done about it. Just to introduce Rowan, he was a detective in Scotland Yard's fraud squad for 12 years. He has worked as a regulator and he is author of 4 books on financial crime. One of which you can see here, the rest are available on Amazon. I think it's time for Penguin to consider a reprint. He submitted evidence to the Parliamentary Committee on Banking Standards, which strangely went missing. And he's been interviewed in the Financial Times, and last week he made his 3rd appearance on the Max Kaiser Show, a programme on the TV channel Russia Today. So, with no further ado, Rowan Bosworth Davies.
Thank you very, very much. Can I just ask you if you could hold the applause? You don't know what you're going to get. But good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a tremendous privilege to be here, and thank you, Phil, for inviting me to come and address. I had no idea that there would be so many people who would be willing to want to come and hear a talk about city fraud, which is why I actually had to rope my own dear son in to come along to support me, because I feared that it might just be the two of us. But thank you so much for coming. It is a trade founded in fraud, born of deceit, and nourished by trick, cheat, wheedle, forgeries, falsehoods, and all sorts of delusions, coining false news this way good, this way bad, whispering imaginary terrors, frights, hopes, expectations, and then preying upon the weaknesses of those whose imaginations they have wrought upon. Anybody any idea where this quote comes from?
Josiah Child? Josiah Child?
No, it's not. It was Daniel Defoe.
Yeah.
He wrote it in 1709 in a book called The Anatomy of Change Alley. It's about stockbroking. And that was his point of view back in those days. And ladies and gentlemen, I have to tell you that very, very little has changed. Philip very kindly referred to the evidence that I submitted to the Parliamentary Commission on Banking Standards. They called for evidence back in August of last year. And I'm sure many of you, in fact, if not most of you, probably know that when a government or when a commission or a committee, a parliamentary committee, calls for evidence, anybody is entitled to respond. And you can send your report in, you can send your evidence in. They kind of make it, not as easy as you'd think. You've got to comply with certain rules. But you submit your evidence to them. And what normally happens is that your evidence is then collated along with everybody else's evidence, and it's published on their website. I sent my evidence in I sent my evidence in at the end of August of last year. And naturally, like you do, I used to sort of keep an eye on the website. And my evidence didn't appear in the list of collated documents. So I wrote to them, I rang them up, rang them up, and I said, the paper that I submitted, it doesn't appear to have been made it into your collated list. Oh, I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Bosworth Davies, we don't appear to have received any evidence from you. Oh, okay. I said, would you mind looking? No, of course, we'll be happy to look. We'll call you back. Needless to say, of course, nobody phoned me back. So I left it for a week or two. It's getting up towards Christmas, and I rang them again. And I said, can I speak to whatever her name was? And another person then took over, a man took over and said, well, what is it you want? And I said, well, I spoke to a young woman and I talked about my evidence that I've submitted, and she said that they hadn't received it. They said, no, that's right, we haven't received anything from you, and why do you keep bothering us? I said, well, I think I have submitted some evidence to you, and I would just like to know when it's going to appear in the collated documents in your list. Well, we'll look into it and we'll get back to you. Okay, fine. And you probably guessed it, nobody bothered to ring back. So I thought, well, I was beginning to smell a rat now, well, possibly a government servant, but I thought, this is ridiculous, there's no point in me carrying on talking to these apparatchiks. So what I did was, I sent an email to the chairman of the committee. And I said to Mr. Tari, I said, look, I've submitted evidence, you keep asking questions on every commission I've been watching. Every time you get somebody, a witness in front of you, you ask the same question. Why is nobody being prosecuted for financial crime, and why is nobody going to prison? And I said, you've asked this question half a dozen times. You asked it of the chairman of the Financial Services Authority, who didn't seem to have any answer for you. And I have submitted evidence to you in which I believe contains some of the answers that you need to know, and contains explanations as to why people aren't being prosecuted, and contains explanations as to why nobody is going to be prosecuted. And I just thought that you might like to know about this, except that your civil servants keep telling me that they haven't received this evidence. Now, I didn't bother to chase him up. I didn't get a response from him. I didn't expect any. Very difficult for the chairman of a public committee to be seen to be talking individually to one witness. So I didn't expect any response from him. But a week later, I rang the committee's offices again. And no sooner did I say who I was, oh, good morning, it's Rowan Bosworth. Ah, Mr. Bosworth Davies, some miraculous thing has happened. Your evidence, it was here all the time. We've found it. Isn't that marvellous? I said, yeah, it's fantastic. It's almost coincidental. And they said, well, of course we're going to submit it to all the members of the committee. And they said, but our people upstairs, our managers, they want to redact it. They want to cut chunks out of it. I said, well, help me with that? Why would they want to do that? And they said, because there are elements in your report which they believe would offend the banks. So I said, you're going to have to forgive me, but actually, right now, worrying about offending the banks is the last thing on my mind of concern. I really don't actually give a toss. I said, but whatever, I can't stop you redacting it, that's a matter for you. But the only way I'm going to be able to make sure that people who want to read it can see it is I will circulate it myself, which is why I put it on my blog site, why I put it on my website, why I sent it to Phil, and it's now beginning to go the rounds. These were the opening statements that I sent in my evidence. This was the executive summary. This paper makes the assertion that the British banking industry has become identical with an organised criminal enterprise. It examines the nature of the criminogenic personality, and it determines the kind of person who is more likely to break the criminal law and why. It asserts that this state of affairs has been allowed to develop because of the failure of the regulatory process to develop the necessary skills and knowledge of the conduct of criminals to enable them to deal professionally with the misdeeds of the banking sector and the reluctance of the regulators to use their statutory powers effectively. It defines why there needs to be a far greater degree of criminal prosecution brought against financial practitioners, and explains why such processes are among the only penalties that such practitioners truly fear. And I will try later on to explain what I mean by that. As Phil's told you, for many years of my life, I was a fraud squad officer. I started out my life, in fact, I qualified first of all as a barrister. But unfortunately in those days, I tried to get pupillage. Many of you will know that to practice as a barrister, you have got to get somebody to be willing to take you into their chambers. And you need to get a thing called pupillage. You go and work for other barristers for a year, and you pay them for the privilege of having you. It's a very, 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 very democratic process. And so there I was, flogging the streets of the temple, trying to get pupillage. And meeting all these, this is back in 1971, and knocking on people's doors to ask them whether they would give me a pupillage or not. And my dear chap, how awfully nice of you to think about coming to see us. We're so honoured that you'd think about coming to us. Do we know you? I mean, does anybody, Bosworth Davies, does that name mean anything? Anybody know? No, okay, no. Well, we'd love to have you, but it seems we don't have any vacancies at the moment. And there were other colleagues of mine in the bar school. They were all getting pupillages, but I wasn't. And after a while, it occurred to me that actually I wasn't getting it because the whole system was designed to keep people like me out of it. Because I came from a working class background. My father's father was a miner in South Wales. My mother's people were farmers. We didn't have any connections. We were not known in these fields. And people like me were just, it was the way they had of keeping people like me out. In those days, they didn't have the kind of scholarships and the bursaries they do have today. And it has to be said that the bar has changed, and it is becoming a little bit more open-handed. But it taught me an important lesson. It taught me a lesson that one of the elements that controls our society so much is the element of class. And that class is still wielding a pernicious influence in the way in which our society is run and is organised. And it occurred to me, it started to become clearer to me that there is one law for one element of the class structure, and there's another law for another element of the class structure. And of course, this started me in a very, very detailed reading analysis, and I started to read stuff that I'd never read at university. I think possibly most of us educate ourselves better when we've left university than when we're there. And I started to read Marx, and I started to read some of the more radical political writers, and I started to educate myself properly. And later, when I joined I joined the Metropolitan Police as part of the Robert Mark era, when Robert Mark wanted to bring in better qualified people to come and become police officers in London, in the Metropolitan Police. Many of you will be familiar with the fact that in those days the Metropolitan Police was the most corrupt, rotten to the core organisation, particularly among the CID, the very branch I wanted to join. But Robert Mark brought in a whole new breed of officers, and I was one of them. And very quickly I got I got into the CID quickly, and I was working in southeast London in a place called Peckham, chasing sort of young kids around the streets who felt that the best way to make to take money out of the bank was at the wrong end of a sawn-off shotgun. And